Wow. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this June 10th, 2021 meeting of Borough Council. We'd ask that you please rise for a moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilor Hicks.
Mr. Mayor, just to get our thoughts to our moment of silence. At 9:30 p.m. on the evening of June 5th, 1944, the Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower called all of his operational commanders to solicit the recommendations for whether Operation Overlord should proceed. The weather guessers, as we like to call them in the military, were short on confidence in the minimum required overcast wind and sea state conditions, but they did think there was a small potential window that could support the delivery of tens of thousands of Allied troops. On a French beachhead in Normandy, much further away from the English coast of Calais, that German commanders were expecting, Eisenhower had about an hour to decide, as paratroopers would have to be launched to begin battlefield preparation maneuvers just after midnight. The commanders were about evenly split between go and delay, where a delay would essentially require a completely new operational plan, requiring weeks to generate and likely allowing more potent defensive fortifications to emerge along the coastline. I think we all know Eisenhower's decision. The fate of tens of thousands of English, Canadian, American troops were decided by a single man. The ultimate success of the D-Day Normandy invasion is arguably our finest moment as a nation. The decision to take the fight to the enemy and not settle for a suboptimal negotiation from a fascist nation was an act of commission. To fail on an act of commission was deemed a better alternative than a successful act of omission. As we remember the brave soldiers, airmen, and Marines who died 77 years ago this week on Sword Omaha and Utah Beach, I ask that we take our moment of silence tonight to think about all of those who died in acts of commission supporting our nation's values and who emboldened us to stand up for those principles that are worth fighting for. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilor Hicks. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. I'm not sure. Okay. Well, I can assure you that we're all here, but just to be on the safe side, Councilor Hicks?
Present.
Councilor Stubbe?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Schultz?
Right next to you.
Thank you. Councilor Crampsey?
Here.
Councilor Fulham-Winston?
Here.
Councilor Landis?
Here.
And Mayor Tim Scott, I'm here as well. Thank you very much. Recognize Deputy Mayor Schultz for a special order.
I wanted to take the opportunity tonight to recognize an effort that a number of people successfully put together over the last several weeks that culminated in probably a very poor acceptance speech by me last night in the All-America City Award. Carlisle, for those of you who are not aware, won that award last night. That award is given by the National Civic League, has been given by the League since 1949. This year was for communities, to recognize communities that leverage civic engagement, collaboration, inclusiveness, and innovation to successfully address local issues. And we went through a terribly difficult year over the last year, and it was a recognition of the efforts of a number of people in this community, community members of borough staff, borough council, and stakeholders within this borough. And we didn't accomplish that without the entire community of 19,000 people. But I want to specifically thank those who participated in the presentation and the preparation of that presentation. I'll begin still to your right, Mayor Scott. I'll begin with Mayor Scott to my left. Councilor Joel Hicks, Councilor Brenda Landis, Gary Kirk, Maya Camo, Stephanie Taylor, Susan Armstrong, Borough Manager, Owen Snyder, our Assistant Borough Manager, Margie Ensign, Kara Curtis, Tawanda Stallworth, Jessica Poe, Mohammed Badisi, Carla Farrell, Tony Underwood, Sarah Markowitz, and our friend across the pond, Jane Meek in Carlisle, England, where we've made a partnership across the Atlantic Ocean. All of these people have one thing in common, although they come from different places, and one quite a distant place. Some of them were born here in Carlisle. Some have been here for decades, and some just arrived here in the last several years. But they all love this town. They all have been engaged in this community, and they show that passion each and every day. As all of you are here tonight to show your passion about your community. So just thank you from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of the hearts of every council member and the mayor up here for the incredible effort. And we can all stand a little taller, walk a little more proudly, because we are an all-America city. But of course, we knew that before last night. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
I'm sorry, can I ask one?
Oh,
can I add one
absolutely.
more story? Because I think this
Absolutely.
is an important story, and just on my Twitter doesn't really give it the credence that I feel like it needs. Tawanda Stallworth presented eloquently on the presentation, and she is a descendant of folks that are buried at Lincoln Cemetery, and that is a black eye on our history, and we're trying to do the best that we can to acknowledge it and not let that history disappear. But her great-grandmother petitioned the court to keep that one headstone, and that is the headstone that is in Lincoln Cemetery. And on the day that we won, Fleda Mae Jordan would have turned 121 years old. So it was her own birthday on the day that we won, and her great-granddaughter helped us secure that by telling the story to a national audience. And although it's just, here in Borough Hall, but I do want that story to continue on because it's important. So I appreciate Tawanda taking the lead on that, and so we celebrate Fleda as well.
Well said. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Again, as Deputy Mayor said, we know Carlisle's all-American city, but this just puts the icing on the cake, and it's our second time winning this. Or was it the first time or second time? First time. First time. Okay, all right. I must be remembering something else.
Maybe it was a premonition.
Maybe it was. It was a premonition that I had. But yeah, and I think the guy that did the voiceover was pretty good too, I think. But no, seriously, congratulations, everyone. This was truly a group effort, and I couldn't be prouder of all the folks that put in all the hard work to make it happen. So thank you very much. Next up is public hearing. Turn things over to Councilor Crampsey for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a public hearing under Community Planning and Smart Growth Committee tonight on the Grace United Methodist Map Amendment Ordinance. So I think the way we'll do this is we'll start with Attorney Gilroy, if that's okay, and then we'll turn it over to citizens to be heard, and then we'll finish up with comments from council. So just a reminder before everyone starts, if you are we encourage you to approach the podium to start speaking. Before you give your comments, just give your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Hubert Gilroy, Martin Law Offices, 10 East High Street here in Carlisle. The attorney for the applicant, which is 3T, and which I've mentioned a few times, is the Tucky family from here in Carlisle. We're talking about rezoning of the Grace United Methodist Church, 4345 Southwest Street. I have with me tonight Jeff Barnes, who's the building committee chair of the church. I'm going to ask him to give you a few remarks for purposes of some background for council. I'm going to have a few remarks with respect to procedure so far. Mr. Tucky, who's out of town, is on via Zoom. He's going to have some brief remarks. We'll be available for questions, but also there's a lot of folks here who have comments, I suspect. So there may be more comments than questions. So I'll ask Jeff to step up first.
Good evening. Jeff Barnes, 14 East Harmon Drive, Carlisle. And as Hubert said, I am the building committee chair for Carlisle United Methodist Church, which that responsibility included not only managing the construction of our new church, but also selling the former Grace building. In 2013, the three United Methodist churches in town chose to merge and begin ministry in the former Grace building. We sold the other two church buildings, so began at the former Grace building and decided right off the bat we would begin a study to decide whether to stay in that building, the Grace building, long term, or would we buy land and build. Well, you already know the outcome of that. 2 years later, we voted and chose to buy land and build over on the Smith Farm on South Spring Garden Street. So at that point in 2015, we began our process of looking for a buyer for the former Grace building. And we very purposely chose not to list it commercially with a commercial realtor. We didn't want to get into a situation of out-of-state developers, people from outside the community coming in and trying to see what they could do with the building. We very much wanted it to stay local. And so we did our search by word of mouth. We began with Dickinson College, approaching them to see if they might be interested, and they were not at that moment in time. Next, we, at that point in time, were working with CADIC, Cumberland Area Economic Development Corporation, trying to help them and partner with them for a community campus over at the balance of the Smith Farm. So along the way in there, Jonathan Bowser, executive director at that time, became interested in the property, and they took a good, long, hard look at it and eventually chose not to pursue it. Following that, a former Borough Council member, Matt Madden, connected me with a developer in York who specialized in historic renovations. His interest in it was to create a boutique hotel, but it was contingent upon him arranging some kind of partnership with Dickinson College that would become sort of their go-to venue for use. That partnership never developed, so that developer turned away. All of these initial things happened in a very short period of time. Then we sort of caught our breath and started thinking locally who might be interested in taking on a project, A, of this magnitude, and B, doing it to the benefit of this community as well as the neighborhood. And Ken Tuckey was one of the first people that came to mind. I've known Ken a long time, known what an excellent person he is, as well as his family. Certainly know of his reputation in town and the fantastic work he's done. Centenary Building being a perfect example. So we knew Ken would be someone, A, that we could trust, and B, who would have the best interest of the community and neighborhood in mind, as well as preserving the historic integrity of that building. Because obviously for members like myself who've been there for a very, very long time, that means a lot to us. So at that point, discussion started with Ken, and that leads us to where we are tonight, where in order for him to repurpose it, he needs a change in zoning to give him the ability to do a repurposing with all the options open to him in that vein. Now, the most important thing I think I can present to you tonight is also some talk about the usage of that building over the years. There is a stereotype out there in some circles that think of churches as a place that are used a couple hours on Sunday mornings, and that's pretty much it. Maybe a meeting here or there, maybe a choir practice, but from all intents and purposes, that's what a church building's used for, Sunday mornings. But I know that is true in some cases, in some churches that I've worked with and others around it. I'm sure you do too. But I'm here to tell you it is most certainly untrue when it comes to Carlisle United Methodist Church. We were very much and are a 7-day-a-week church. We worship anywhere between, say, 450 and over 500 people on average on a Sunday morning. That's in 3 services, not 1, in 3, but that's the collective total. 1,100 members. And some of the biggest usage that we have is we have a daycare preschool that has over 100 children in it and 30 staff. They operate from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Now just think about that math a little bit. 100 plus children being dropped off and being picked up 2 trips a day. A lot of traffic, a lot of parking issues. So that was a huge usage of our building. On top of that, we've hosted Carlisle Cares a couple months out of the year at least, and we've had a total of 18 different community groups that we have hosted in that building. That's mostly during the day and evenings. Groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, music therapy, all kinds of groups like that. Once again, a lot of traffic, a lot of foot traffic. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that building literally had hundreds of people in it every day, because of that kind of usage, far, far more than just a Sunday morning. So as we, the church, think about a repurposing of it and what Ken has in mind to do, we can't begin to imagine that his usage could be anywhere close to what this community's experienced as Grace and Carlisle United Methodist Church. When I think of the traffic, the parking issues, the foot traffic in and out, I can't imagine that it will be anything but a reduction. And as a result, we look at this project with Ken's integrity and his experience and his love for this community, coupled with less usage, as a win-win for both the borough, the neighborhood, and the church. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. As we do in a lot of land use projects, it's planning. And before we even filed an application, Kentucky and I met with borough staff with respect to the options for the property. And there was discussion with respect to the existing zoning, the R4, and there was discussion with respect to possible zoning of C1. And it was it certainly was not discouraged by staff, but based upon those discussions, we filed the rezoning application. That was filed, and I was here with Ken the week we filed it, and when Borough Council accepted it, we had some presentations. Then we provided some information to Council with respect to some of Mr. Tucky's and 3T's prior projects within the borough, and otherwise projects that included rehabbing churches, the one in Newville. We provided some information on that. After our meeting with the Borough Council, we then went before the Council or the Borough Planning Commission, and they unanimously recommended approval of this rezoning request. We then went before the County Planning Commission, and they recommended approval of this rezoning request. We then had a meeting last Thursday evening at the church with respect to talking with neighbors. Mr. Schultz suggested we have that meeting, so we went ahead and did that and communicated information on that. A lot of the questions are, what are you going to do? And we don't know what we're going to do. And this is unlike some rezoning requests. People come in with a board showing exactly what they want to put on the property. Mr. Tucky and his team, they don't know that. They're looking for opportunities. They're looking for flexibility in the development, primarily the sanctuary. Residential use is already permitted within the zone, so residential can be installed at the existing building. But the Tucky team wants to preserve that sanctuary, the historical nature of the building. That's their intent. They just simply need some flexibility, and the C1 zone gives that flexibility. So that's why we are moving to C1 if we are approved by council. And I believe Mr. Tucky, if he's on Zoom, I don't know how we connect that. He might have a few remarks.
He just needs to unmute.
I just did that. Thank you very much. Just briefly, in the spirit of providing some general context of the type of redevelopments we undertake, I'd like to point to our past projects as benchmarks, with the understanding of course, that each project and each property is unique. Most of our past projects have been mixed-use projects, combining high-quality living space with retail, restaurant, office, professional services, educational services, and common space. In our commercial side and institutional tenants are typically local professionals, as we believe business is best built on relationships with people who understand our locale and are personally involved in our community. we enjoy this challenge of breathing new life into this historical building, and we appreciate not only its history, but also the process of reimagining its future.
Thanks, Ken. We also have on Zoom, if need be, Dana Clark, who's the architect for the project. He's not going to add any comments, but if any questions come up, he's available. And Ken and I and Jeff and Dana are available for questions either now or if you want to wait until after folks in the audience may have some statements. Like I said, we don't have a planned use. I went into last Thursday's meeting with the neighbors knowing people were going to walk out of there frustrated because they want to know what we're going to do. Well, we don't know what we're going to do, but we need this change if we're going to do anything meaningful with the sanctuary at the building and to maintain the integrity of the historical structures. That's why we're here for that request.
All right, thank you. I think next we'll move into public comment, and then Attorney Gilroy, if you could take some notes if there are questions, and then maybe come back at the end to answer as best as you can. So just a reminder, if anyone would like to speak, come up to the podium, name and address for the record, and we'll make sure that everyone that wants to speak is able to. And then we'll do folks in Borough Hall first, and then if anyone is on Zoom, we'll go to them after that.
Greetings, I'm Carol Ann Johnston, and I've lived at 154 West Pomfret Street for 31 years. And that is directly across from the church parking lot. And I spent many afternoons gazing out at the church van that said, "On fire for the Lord." And that's one of my interesting memories from Carlisle. The zoning for the Grace Church should not be changed from R4 to C1 for the following reasons. Our laws recognize the important role played by commercial enterprises downtown. The intent of C1 zoning is to provide for a wide variety of commercial uses in the downtown. This Methodist church building is not downtown. It is presently and appropriately zoned R4. The intent of R4 zoning is, quote, to avoid development that is too dense or that would aggravate parking shortages. And I'm quoting there from your own document. We've heard no real argument for rezoning other than Mr. Gilroy's claim in an email that Mr. Tuckey might not otherwise be interested in the property unless it becomes zoned C1. Mr. Tuckey, the developer, has not shared his plans for commercializing the church space. In fact, he reported at a neighborhood meeting last Thursday that his son had told him not to say too much. This does not inspire confidence that he can be trusted. Once the zoning is changed, Mr. Tuckey, in effect, will have carte blanche to put whatever kind of commercial operation in place he desires, from a hotel to a fast food restaurant to a convenience store. Any commercial operation would disrupt the neighborhood already overrun with parking and traffic problems. At the meeting on Thursday, the church representative reported that the church asked Mr. Tuckey to buy the property, and he basically has just given the same speech that he gave to us on Thursday here. More than one developer should have the opportunity to submit a bid and proposal before concluding that the only possible use is whatever Mr. Tuckey suggests. The city owes it to its residents to explore other opportunities openly and out of state. To justify offering the site to Mr. Tuckey, an anecdote has been relayed several times about an evil developer, I guess evil, I don't know, out of town who wanted to ruin the First Methodist site on Louder Street. That developer's horrible plans have not been shared. This incident occurred years ago. One bad experience is not a sufficient reason for making any important decision such as this one. That has resulted in asking only one local developer since the church left the building to take on the project. No one from Borough Council consulted the residents of the neighborhood about the plan to rezone, and I understand that legally you did not have to. For the families with small children in the neighborhood, the traffic problems already are dangerous, especially for children walking to school. For those with no off-street parking, finding a place near home already is difficult. Parking blocks from home, which is not uncommon on Pomfret Street, is a perilous proposition, especially in the dark. A most important neighbor, the Bosler Public Library, also is not consulted by borough officials. The Methodist Church regularly hogged the Bosler parking lot, sending patrons either away or to circulate repeatedly in the neighborhood to find parking. Just because the church was a bad neighbor should not mean that it's okay for the next occupant also to overwhelm library and residential parking. The library offers important services and essential facilities for those who are not wealthy. Books, music, computer use, warmth in the winter, coolness in the summer. It needs more, not less, parking. Finally, owning a home in the historic district in many ways is a great pleasure. However, before living in the district, potential buyers need to understand that the expenses to repair their houses will be more than the norm. The Historical Architectural Review Board, or HARB to its friends, strictly forbids altering the exterior of the house. Its appearance must remain true to its historical origins. To give a concrete example, my roof is a single-seam metal roof. To replace it with the like materials is costing me just south of $35,000. If the neighborhood becomes undesirable, the city will risk losing one of its most important assets. Buyers will not want to pay what is, in essence, a historical neighborhood tax if the neighborhood is overrun with commercial traffic. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the public in Borough Hall that wishes to make public comment? Go ahead.
Good evening. Melinda Schlitt, SCHLITT, 263 Walnut Street in Carlisle. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm going to read my comments here. The issue before the Borough Council on which they will vote tonight is whether to rezone the property formerly occupied by the Grace Methodist Church from R4, Town Center Residential, to C1, Central Business District. This request, which approved, would fundamentally and permanently change the zoning map for what has been a long-standing and historic residential part of Carlisle. This request was made by Kentucky and 3T investors. They seek to purchase and develop the property with an eye towards renovating and preserving the architectural character of the church, but with no clearly articulated plans about the building's intended use that would warrant such an impactful zoning change. We have heard some mention of apartments and possibly offices, but only in the most general terms. Mr. Tuckey's lawyer, who also represents 3T investors, Mr. Gilroy, made clear at the March 31st Borough Council workshop meeting that rezoning this residential property to a central business district property would allow flexibility for the developer once the property had been purchased. In his formal email to Alyssa de Blasio May 25th, which he said could be freely shared with others, Mr. Gilroy reiterated this premise. Quote, "There is no specific use being proposed at this time that requires a decision by Borough Council. The business uses provided by the C1 will provide a new owner with some increased flexibility." We all know that Kentucky is a long-standing and well-respected developer and builder in this area. Mr. Tuckey's integrity as a builder and the quality of his company's work are not in question, and I have every confidence that he would be meticulous in his attention to repurposing this historic church. But let's also be honest, developers are not philanthropists. They are in business to turn a profit, and the reluctance to share even preliminary ideas that warrant a major zoning change with those who will be most impacted on a daily basis, the residents who live in the immediate area, is testament to that mindset. Mr. Gilroy's closing remarks in his email letter to which I referred earlier also suggest that the zoning change is a mandatory prerequisite to redeveloping the property. Quote, "I note that 3T has not yet purchased the property and the agreement to purchase is contingent upon the approval of the rezoning request." End quote. My concerns are the following. If rezoned as part of the Central Business District, then anything listed under Article 9, C1 255, 60 to 62 could potentially exist on this property in the future. If, for example, Mr. Tuckey and 3T had to sell. restaurants, retail stores, groceries, even a tavern. Parking and traffic conditions right now have been amply described by residents as seriously problematic. An incursion of C1 zoning into an existing residential zone sets a precedent for other residential churches in the borough to be similarly rezoned at the request of a developer should they close or move. Property values of residents could be impacted by whatever commercial entity is established for this project, and no one purchased a home in the immediate area of this church because it was within a stone's throw of a commercially zoned area. In the proposed map amendment summary, as of May 25th, 2021, the second paragraph states that, quote, a zoning map should be judged primarily on the differences in the zoning districts, i.e. what a zoning map amendment may bring to the area versus what it may permit to be developed in the area if the zoning remains unchanged. The reason to weigh the proposed change in this way is because state law does not tie a developer to a particular plan at this stage. Concepts could change after a map amendment, and even the developer could change, end quote. Let me repeat that last sentence. Concepts could change after a map amendment, and even the developer could change. What then is the Borough Council's specific rationale for approving such an impactful zoning change if it is not necessarily tied to the developer or to plans? How do the benefits of rezoning part of this residential neighborhood to that of the central business district outweigh all of the potential drawbacks that have already been voiced by residents over the past 2 weeks? It is our understanding that there is strong support within local and county agencies for the C1 zoning change. It is also our understanding that much of what Mr. Tuckey has in mind for this project is of a residential nature. The minority part of the development, it seems, would be commercial. The better course of action for those most directly impacted by this proposal now and in the future, the residents, would be to maintain the current R4 zone and for Mr. Tuckey to seek a variance for that part of the building that might potentially serve as office space or another small commercial entity, and thus avoid potential uses in the future that are incompatible with the residential identity of this neighborhood, if or when the property were to be sold. Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
Hello, Alyssa de Blasio, 170 West Pomfret Street, basically in the front door of the church. In the 5 minutes that I'm allotted today, I'd like to ask Borough Council to consider 3 issues. And like other neighbors have said, these issues have nothing to do with Mr. Tuckey or his integrity because the decision, as I understand it, has to do with zoning and the neighborhood and not the project or the developer. And so the first issue is the question of protection. I ask you to please consider that the stated purpose of zoning in Code 255-2C1 is to protect residents and the community. Zoning is the most important level and the last level of protection for residents. So if this space were to be rezoned, then, as I've learned from Deputy Mayor Schultz, any plan that then complies with the ordinance would have to be accepted as is. And also, I learned that if there's any ambiguity in the code, the decision will fall on the side of the developer. Now, my intention here is not to use anybody's words against them, but I did not know this, and I think it's important for all of us to consider this, or for Borough Council to please consider this as you're making your decision, that zoning is in place, as I've learned, first and foremost, to set an intent for a neighborhood and then to protect that intent, because later on, when decisions are made, they defer to the developer. And this property is not bordered. It's bordered one side commercial, which is the library where no commercial activity is going on, and 3 sides some residential. And I ask you to conjure in your mind an image of the zoning map. It's actually quite linear. It's sort of quadrants, it's rectangles. And if this were to be rezoned as C1, it would be a very large peninsula sticking into the R4. So if the first issue is protection, the second is the question of renewal. The 2019 Borough Comprehensive Plan cites the following key goal of the borough moving forward: to, quote, renew the central business district, purpose, location, and character. And later this is articulated as, quote, the promotion of existing resources. And here I want to note the wording renewal and existing and not expansion. And later on this comprehensive plan that Borough voted on in March 2019, There is the note that we should be focusing our efforts on existing commercial districts and not expanding the C1 district. And a study cited in the 2019 plan actually recommends, quote, a smaller central business district and more stringent regulation of first floor uses. So we've talked about protection, we've talked about renewal. My third comment to the board tonight has to do with vision. And I wonder, has the borough considered what might happen if and when other church properties come up for sale in the future? And has council discussed a community-wide vision for this inevitability? My point here is that rezoning now may be hasty, and I would call on the borough to undertake a study like the one that other cities, including the city I came from before here, Pittsburgh, undertook, which was decades-long conversation about what do we do with these community buildings like churches that serve the social function and now no longer do. And some communities have come up with a new zoning called transitional, which transitions from residential to commercial. There are other solutions out there. My point is that the idea, perhaps, the solution is not always found in the existing code. And in the case of Carlisle, especially where our historic downtown is so critical, especially Pomfret Street, I regularly have people walking by in the summers, taking pictures of my front door, painting my front door. It's something that draws people to downtown. And I think we have to be really proud of our historic downtown, but we also have to protect it and make sure that decisions we're making about rezoning really keep in mind what brings people to stroll around downtown in the evenings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, many of you are my friends. I am Sherwood McGinnis, and my address is 148 West Pomfret Street, across the street diagonally from the church. I came to Carlisle in 2007, 2008, being assigned here to teach at the Army War College. And this has been my home for the last dozen years. When I had the opportunity to move into the residential downtown area, I took that and have lived on Pomfret Street for those last dozen years. That is, for me, I have seen an increase in traffic. I have also seen the fact that it seems that we are losing the residential feeling of this street, this neighborhood. And I only ask that we look at what will be there, developed by Mr. Tuckey, who Ken is a friend of mine, to ensure that residential space remains residential. And that I would ask that we not change the zoning at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Muldoon. I live at 129 West Pomfret Street. My husband and I and daughter moved into Carlisle on Pomfret Street specifically for the housing. We've been there 2 years. We love the neighborhood. We love to go for walks. We enjoy being close to people and getting to know our neighbors. However, this change in zoning, I disagree with. I think it's a rush to judgment because there is finally something on the table for the church to grab hold of. I think that the comments that have been made already based on the zoning need to be clearly vetted before making these kind of decisions, because the decisions that are making today are going to affect the future. And I, for one, have a problem right now when my daughter and I go for a walk or for a bike ride. We have to be careful. We cannot go down Pomfret Street. And we have to look 2 and 3 times before we cross the street because of the lack of consideration for the population. And we've seen that growing over the past 2 years that we've lived on West Pomfret. So I would ask that you defer the decision at this point until you have clearly vetted what the property will look like, although we don't know, and what it means in the future. Because if Carlisle is to survive both in a historic and a commercial district venue, there has to be a balance. And by changing this zoning, the balance is off kilter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Harry Kime, 48 West Pomfret Street. I applaud the research these people have done. I'm not as well prepared. But I will say that I'll go along with them in being Toto to try to pull back the curtain and say there's something to see behind this. I live in the historic district. I also live in the C1 district on that block of Pomfret Street. And if you want to do something to your property in a historic district, in Carlisle, in a historic district specifically, with those regulations, if you've got 2 sticks and some nails, there's a plan that needs to be in place. And right now, we don't have a plan that we can see as the people living in town, the residents, as to what's going to happen. Well-intentioned ideas, fine. Show us something. Give us something to work with. Ideas like the church brought a lot of traffic, again, as was stated before. Well, maybe it was unfortunate they did. Do we want to repeat that? Do we want to come to the opportunity of repeating that? The claim is made it will be less traffic. We don't know for sure. I can tell you right now, living in that area and having to park in the area and knowing other people that park in the area on a daily basis, parking is very difficult to find. When Dickinson is in town, if you want to park directly around that building, you may be parking a block and a half, 2 blocks or more away on occasion, on a regular basis, actually. So I would say, as has been stated before, this should be reviewed and vetted a little bit more to see that it truly serves all members of the community. And there's ideas like looking for the variance, having it stay R4 and look for variance for one portion of that building. You know, these are the kind of things that can be discussed now, and they can't be discussed later. Once it's changed, then it's open for whatever the next developer, the next owner, 20 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, control is lost. The residential people can just throw up their hands and because they have nothing to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, any other members at Borough Hall that want to make a comment during this public hearing?
Hello, Council. My name is Nathan Smith. I work at 71 Ashland Avenue, and I live on the west side, but I used to live on Southwest Street in view of the church. I'd like to echo pretty much what everybody said here in so many words. You know, I'd like to see it remain a residential area. One of the chief concerns is that once it's rezoned, it's out of the community's hands completely. And I think when, we live in a community, we want to feel a sense of ownership and equity in that community. And when you're just a community member who maybe owns a house or, like me, doesn't own anything, and something big is happening, you feel powerless. I mean, I know Councilor Landis is familiar with that. She worked really hard just to get a couple trees at the former Tire and Wheel site. In the case of the Tire and Wheel site, I've spoken to a resident there who had a leaky roof a year after the thing was built, and she couldn't get in touch with her landlord about it. And, I'm really glad that Kentucky is a local developer who does have a stake in the community and did beautiful work on that property on Pitt and High. Um, I'm really glad this isn't a meeting about some out of town developer who just wants to, take their money and run. But I just found out about this at the meeting in, I guess it was March or April, and obviously my interest was piqued. I grew up there. I lived there for 20 years, and my experience was a residential neighborhood, like all you guys. And I heard this meeting was tonight. I thought it was just a hearing. I didn't realize it was the night you guys were voting on it. And I do want to applaud Miss Taylor because over the past few years, the amount that we've had like transparency into what's going on in the borough has been like amazing. I mean, like tenfold of what it was before. And I wouldn't have known about this if I hadn't seen the meeting on Facebook. So very cool. But yeah, the fact that it feels like we have no recourse after tonight is kind of like speaks to that issue of like, transparency, equity in the community, that kind of thing. Because, uh, some of you all like seems like the whole block of Pomfret Street here doesn't want anything there, and this is their final say. I realized I read in the paper there was a meeting the other day. I didn't know about it. My parents who live right there didn't know about it. So number one, I don't want to see the thing get changed from residential just for all the reasons that they've spoken about. But number two, I don't know what is to be done about this. I'm no legal scholar. I don't have the legal acumen to figure out all of the borough codes and how everything works. But I do want to feel like when some giant change is going to happen in our community, we know about it and we like really have a chance to give our input and the whoever's making the change can really hear the input. I mean, I heard Kentucky's comments about wanting to hear input from the community, and it seems like the input from the community is they want it residential. But after tonight, if it's rezoned, there is no input from the community, legally speaking. And like I said, it seems like Mr. Tucky's a longstanding member of the community, does beautiful work, but after tonight's all in his hands. So thank you, Council, and congratulations to all of us on winning the All-American City Award. I'd like to echo Mr. Mayor and Councilor Schultz's comments that we were always an All-American city in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who are at Borough Hall? All right, we'll throw it to Zoom, but if any other members of the public think of something, feel free after we go to Zoom. So Stephanie, I'm gonna throw it to you if any hands go up.
Councilor Clancy?
Joyce.
Hello? Councilor Cramsey. There are no attendees in Zoom that wish to speak.
All right, thank you, Joyce. All right, any other comments from the public before we go to council? Go ahead.
Hi, everybody, and yay, All-American City. Can we see this online somewhere, I hope? Okay, all right, got it. Okay, I'm Sharon O'Brien. I live at 217 West Pomfret. And just a couple things to say. I'm not necessarily opposed to the switch from R4 to C1. But I think what's disturbing is what somebody brought up tonight that I actually hadn't really thought about before, which is what happens in the future if Mr. Tucky decides that it's not working for him and it gets resold. There can be less control. We don't really have the full vision yet. I don't understand enough about why a variance doesn't work. Why it can't stay residential and a variance for whatever he would propose would work. I do think, speaking for myself, that it could be very exciting to have a multi-use facility here with a restaurant or a shop, offices. Of course, where the parking could be problematic. I guess I just want to say one thing about the testimony about the the church and the parking involved with the church. I don't find that consoling or persuasive. I think those of us who live around here know how all of Dickinson's parking lots were used on Sunday for folks who were going to church. And just during the week, okay, so 30 folks worked here, but I'm not convinced that those were 30 cars that were parked here all day. I mean, there must have been a lot of flow. So it seems to me the assessment of the parking has been so far impressionistic. And I would also say that the speculation that there would be 10 spots on the street needed for the apartments, which I think was in the letter. I don't know how one arrived at the, how do you arrive at a study that there are actually 10 spaces available on a consistent basis? And somebody did mention, and I know you all are familiar with the 8-month, 4-month issue in the area, which is what happens when the Dickinson students are here versus the summer. So right now is not typical of the parking situation. So those are just a couple of thoughts. So I'm not necessarily opposed to the switch, but I think it's a little disconcerting to think that things could change in the future and there wouldn't be any more input from the community.
Thank you for those comments. Any other comments from the public? I will now turn to Borough Council. Any comments from members of council?
I actually have a question. If I can get my mic on. I have a question for Councilor Brenneman, who's with us on Zoom.
Yep.
And he's the borough's attorney.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Keith.
Hi.
Several times people have mentioned the possibility, and it's something I hadn't thought about before, that if the parcel stayed R4 and a plan was put in place and construction was started, and say that Ken did want to do something like a restaurant in the sanctuary, could he get a variance for that purpose given R4 zoning?
I'll be very frank. He could try to get one. I don't think there would be any legal basis for him to receive one from the zoning hearing board because he has to show a feature of the property, a topographical feature, or some issue that would justify him developing it in a different way than what's already in the zoning. So I think it'd be very difficult for him to do that.
So if it were to stay R4, only those permitted uses under the R4 zoning would be allowed?
That is correct. And I believe there's some special exception uses that could be pursued, but I'm not sure if that is something that Mr. Tuckey is interested in. That would require a decision by the zoning hearing board.
What kind of do you have a sense of what kind of special exemptions would be an example?
I don't have the code in front of me right now, but I do recall there are some special exception uses mentioned in the code itself.
Okay, it looks like public or primary or secondary schools, public utility uses such as electric substations, and private recreational facilities subject to compliance. Oh, there's one on the other side. Places of worship, which that's sort of off the table, as far as we know. So it doesn't look like if it stayed R4 that getting a variance for a commercial operation would be possible.
In my opinion, I think it's extremely difficult.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I could just jump in on that point and help Solicitor Brenneman out too, because I was thinking along the same lines, and pulled up the requirements for a variance. And I'll read the first couple. That you would have to prove in every case in a variance, and in particular a very high burden for the use variance that we were talking about tonight. One is that there are unique physical circumstances or conditions, including irregularity, narrowness, or shallowness of lots, size, or shape, or exceptional topographical or other physical conditions peculiar to the particular property, and that the unnecessary hardship is due to such conditions and not the circumstances or conditions generally created by the provisions of the zoning ordinance, in the neighborhood or district in which the property is located. That's number one. Number two, and Solicitor Brenneman almost got that verbatim, right? Good job, Keith. Number two is that because of such physical circumstances or conditions, there is no possibility that the property can be developed in strict conformity with the provisions of the zoning ordinance, and that the authorization of a variance is therefore necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property. And with that, I think Solicitor Brenneman's analysis of it is absolutely accurate, that it wouldn't meet the legal standards for a variance.
Can I get a verification, Keith, from you? I also think if it's granted, they don't convey, variances do not convey. So if they tried to sell to another commercial user, potentially got the variance to do some commercial operation, the potential buyer would be at risk and would have to go through a separate variance approval, because variances don't convey, which will put a lot of risk. Is that correct, Keith? He's really thinking
No,
right
if
now.
a variance is obtained, they will pass to the next owner.
The variance.
The variance would pass. It's confined by the conditions of approval in the variance, if any.
For exactly the same use.
Right. That variance runs.
That is correct.
The variance runs with the land, so it would go to the next owner in line.
But it'd have to be a restaurant to a restaurant, not a restaurant to a gym.
Right. It would have to be a zoning hearing board in a variance application would approve that specific variance use that's being requested.
So it'd be safe to say that they would be constrained in selling to an exact like variance.
Right. Okay. So if there was a variance, as you said, for a restaurant, and the next owner in line wanted a restaurant, they would not have to seek an additional variance.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Right. Thanks everyone for that. I'm going to throw it back to council, but I also had a quick question for Keith while we have you. Is there a way in the land development process to have the zoning revert if the owner of the property changes?
No, there's not. Once you grant zoning change, that zoning is available to any future owner, and that future owner can do anything that's consistent with the zoning that's allowed in the ordinance.
Great, thank you. All right, other members of council for comments and questions?
I just note on that last point, unless we later revise the zoning, which has there is some risk to that. If you're down zoning a property and not doing a comprehensive rezone of an area.
Thank you for that. Councilor Landis?
Okay, I don't know how many minutes I have here, but I've been in talks with lots of folks, and I care very much about this type of process. I did pull up today some of because I went to all the meetings for the factory redevelopment, the rezoning. Actually more of the redevelopment process rather than the zoning itself. But I did want to look up and make sure I understood when the zoning process and vote happened, because I didn't actually recall it. But I also wanted to ensure that it went through the same process that it's going through here. I am giving you this analogy because I want you to understand that I am not thinking of just this. It's been brought up about would we do it a different way if it was Allison Hall, if there were different variations, and so I'm considering what we've done in a different area. Yes, it was industrial to mixed use, so I understand it's not residential to commercial, but it did. It could have gone to residential, and it was decided to put it into a mixed use choice. So the process of what went on, what would go there, we did not have a developer that was interested. So it really was what you're saying, like once we change this over, what is happening and who is going to show up. And the developer that initially did look at Tire and Wheel, I remember this meeting, and they did throw out a plan of sorts, or said, it could be medical arts. And to this day, which there is no medical arts there, I still to this day get neighbors like, oh, there's going to be a medical arts building, and there actually isn't. So I mean, there is a concern also of hypothetically giving a plan and then latching on to it and then choosing something else. So the idea that we are voting on looking at that building and trying to figure out what is the best use of it. So before I was there on Thursday, and then again tonight when they spoke, I actually wasn't aware of the other two developers that were possibly interested in the site. And I was interested to hear that both of them did have commercial aspects in their plans as well. They did not come to council to ask for the commercial zoning change. And as I was sitting there, I was actually looking at the space as well. So I am taking in all of these pieces, and I'm also looking at I understand a neighborhood, I do. And no matter if you live right along High in Hanover, you're still in a neighborhood. You still live around other people and you build community. So I'm not trying to diminish the importance of your experiences and the things that you care about. That's why I've tried to say that although this is a vote about the zoning change, all of the things that you've already brought up are very relevant, and we can think through that as, through a SALDO, the subdivision and land development ordinance process, or just in general working with borough staff to try to figure out what is wrong with this intersection, or speeding, or traffic backups, or things like that. That's stuff that we do, but we have to know about it, and we haven't had folks come and talk. So some of these things, I think they are related, but they don't necessarily in my view, come together to justify not possibly zoning this in a different manner. I will pull up really quick the county comments. Let me go there a second. Because it was brought up a couple things within our own comprehensive plan. Believe me, I read it. I read all the plans, and there can be inconsistencies, but in our own plan, it does. They pulled out that objective 3.3, page 33, indicates the borough should establish incentives and consider policies for the creation and rehabilitation of downtown living units. 4.1 on page 33 indicates the borough should review the central business district for unsuccessful reuse due to zoning and update as appropriate. This review should consider the size and location of the district. So in that case, I'm also thinking of those other possible developers. The other thing I do want to say about the redevelopment of the factory sites, then this is the same that I'm thinking of your street, and that is B Street. And B Street was buffered by two factories, and it is obviously changing, and their neighborhood is going to be changing when it is a connector from 34 to 74. We could have chosen, I was not on council at that point, but council could have chosen to not rezone, to keep for the protection of those B Street residents. It was rezoned, and that street is going back in, but there are other traffic mitigation, traffic calming measures. So what I'm trying to say is that tonight is not the end of anything. As I was at all of those meetings through the Carlisle Urban Redevelopment Plan, and I try to get my neighbors around, you will still be part of this process. And just like I couldn't, say that yes, the medical arts building was going to end up across the street from my house, because it didn't. We do have to have uses within our zoning. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything else. And I will say, Stephanie did get an accolade for the transparency of posting things, but actually it's council that have really pushed to get as much information out there. So it has been said that we've tried to hide information, and that is not accurate. We've been trying for years here to push for more transparency, and so Stephanie is the one that actually pushes the button to send it out. But we do care about allowing everyone to be part of this process and talking. I will finally end this, I'm sorry, but the state does have requirements, and we did follow them. So we didn't do anything illegal in how we notified, but do I think, we can definitely look at it for future? yes, but we didn't. There was never anything like this for the redevelopment of the factory sites, and this was the same basic process. So we didn't have any concerns that time, and so we did continue as the state required. So those are my comments. I could go on a lot further, but I'll just stop for now.
Thank you for those comments. Any other members of council? Deputy Mayor Schultz.
Before I get into my overall comments, I want to note too, I think there was a suggestion about the rezoning of other churches. And if we do this with the C1 here, do we do that with other churches in the borough? I don't know which churches may border the C1, but I think it's important to understand a concept called spot zoning, which some of you probably came across. And so we can't just drop a zone and make an island of a zone on a parcel where that parcel is surrounded by another zoning district. So if this parcel was out in the middle of the R4 and we tried to rezone it as C1, we would be violating that, and our solicitor would tell us not to do that. This parcel abuts the C1, and I'll touch on that in a bit. And so our options are for it to remain as R4 or to accept this application and approve this application and rezone to C1. So change is often unnerving, and I think it's fairly met with skepticism. And over the past several years, Councilor Landis, Councilor Hicks, and I have experienced change that comes with substantial redevelopment sites within a block or less of our homes. None of us were members of council when the original plans for those sites were approved at the sites impacting us and our neighborhoods. And we've been in your shoes, all of you who are here tonight. Change is also a necessary constant and can provide opportunity to revitalize and reuse property and structures and keep them from dilapidation and misuse. Building reuse can provide an environmental benefit too. This evening we are faced with a choice. The former site of Grace United Methodist Church is going to change. It is not going to be a church any longer. Modern churches aimed at growth demand much greater convenience and parking than the site can deliver. Our choice tonight is binary. We either leave the parcel zoned as R4 or we rezone it as the only legal abutting district, C1. We must decide whether a rezone is the correct choice under the particular circumstances of this parcel. And Melinda, I'll note that paragraph that you quoted from, I wrote that and inserted that because I wanted to make sure that we understand the context of this decision. So I appreciate that you picked up on that. I feel like I was listened to, so thank you. We live in a borough that prizes its history and resilience of architecture, especially in our downtown. The best redevelopment here reuses structures in new ways. As I sat in the church last week, surrounded by the neighbors who will most proximately be affected by either a rezone or the alternative of doing nothing, I scanned the potential uses in the R4 that might be accommodated by that space. There are maybe only a few that could fit. Garden apartments, bed and breakfasts, group homes, a small private school, or a recreation facility. None of those are particularly conducive to the encouragement of building reuse that our comprehensive plan calls for in the downtown and throughout the borough, nor do they make the best of an opportunity for this community and this neighborhood. On the other hand, a rezone to C1 encourages reuse on this corner lot by permitting uses that are literally right around the corner, down the street, and right at the backyards of many of the homes along Pomfret Street. This is an opportunity to add to a walkable, mixed-use neighborhood, which has been a public goal of this council and this community for years. I know there is concern about the impact of traffic from the uses in the C1. And keep in mind, we have that history from the church, where every weekday, the parents of 100 or so children in the daycare were coming and going at peak times, along with the 30 daycare staff members. That doesn't mean 130 cars. I understand that. I'm a parent of children who have been in daycare, and at time during 1 year, both of my children were in a daycare, and I wasn't driving 2 cars to pick them up. On Sundays, there was an average of a little less than 170 attendees at each of the 3 services at the church. When we look at the restrictions caused by parking requirements, even in the C1, at worst, it is likely to be only marginally more than before and could potentially be improved. Atop that, the redevelopment of the site will require a traffic study that will allow input and conditions to mitigate additional traffic and parking issues. And any apartment use, for instance, among a few other uses in the C1, would be required to go through a hearing before our zoning hearing board, where the zoning hearing board could condition the use on parking and traffic mitigation and other reasonable conditions that might be appropriate based on the evidence before them once the uses are then known. So the notion that there's no further input from the public after this evening, if this is approved, is not true. There will be other steps at land development. There will be another step likely if a special exception is requested under the zoning ordinance. And although, as Melinda quoted, I rarely rely on the spoken intent of developers, we have an applicant before us in 3T Investors and Mr. Tuckey that has a history of being responsive to the community and sensitive to the character of our neighborhoods while consistently delivering first-class redevelopment of sites like this. One need only go around the block to the Centenary Building at the southeast corner of Pitt and High Streets to see what Mr. Tuckey accomplished by resurrecting historic architecture from a burnt-out skeleton of a building. Actions do speak louder than words, and Mr. Tuckey has a history of delivering in Carlisle. I could have stopped before that paragraph, and I still would have voted the same way, or will vote the same way. But the fact that Mr. Tuckey is going out on a limb for us here, I'm willing to go a little bit further out than I normally would. And I hear and deeply understand the concerns of our residents in the neighborhood. I will remain attentive and encourage council and all the residents to remain engaged in the process for the good of all involved, should this application proceed successfully. I believe that under the circumstances facing this property on this lot, the rezone is appropriate, and I will vote accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Schultz. Any other comments? I'm looking at the head nod from Joel, and then we'll go to Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Councilor Hicks.
Thank you, Councilor Cramsey. Some of this may sound repetitive, but I feel it's important because you all have been so thoughtful and active in sharing your thoughts. I want you to know exactly what I'm thinking through as I make this decision. It took me getting on council to realize that we actually do have processes, and being in your position, I know sometimes it can feel like, there's a fast one being pulled, perhaps. I'm not really sure how to solve that. It literally took me like, oh, we really do have processes, and they're pretty good. Before I came on council, it was sometimes hard for me to see that if I didn't know where I was looking, where to go to. Before we had a great new website from Ms. Taylor's put together. Yeah, I agree. I believe you when you say it seems like someone's being sort of sprung on you all to have to think something's really happening in your neighborhood. 95% of the things that happen don't happen in your neighborhood. So why would you necessarily know that we're having a meeting, in the R2 or, see, industrial section. So that's how I sort of reconciled why I think I understand why you feel that way. We have made an effort in May 13th. We approved a change to our saldo ordinance to make the connection between development and residents as the process moves a little further, that there's more transparency. And let me just say, if you have good ideas about making the transparency between developers and residents better, you have my ear. I am all in favor of improving the way we do that. but I am confident in saying nothing unusual is happening in this process. It does naturally feel different when it's your neighborhood, and I get it. I know the concerns by many of you are real. I'm not questioning that these are not real impacts that are going to happen to you. That the demand for parking and the amount of traffic will indeed increase relative to the relatively fallow use of the property right now. I mean, it's going to happen. It's just we're talking about how it's going to happen. But I'm genuinely convinced the relative impact of maintaining this as an R4 property or redesignated as a C1 will not actually substantially address the differences in the issues that you're bringing up, which are real. Which we've heard a lot about traffic, we've heard a lot about parking. I don't know the difference about what we're going to decide tonight is really substantially changed too much between what we're talking about. And like my other counselors have said, there's still a lot to be discussed. There's still a lot that comes before the Planning Commission. There's still potentially things from the Zoning Hearing Board. There are things that come before us before any dirt gets digged, so to speak. One only, but you have, you can look at our zoning map, and I will honestly say I don't have it memorized. I never did, but there was a period of time when I saw this coming up, and I'm relatively new to the borough. I've been here about 5 years. I actually thought this was in the C1, just relative to my knowledge of things happening. When I saw it was abutting to the C1 and the R4, I was like, oh, okay, it's right on the boundary. Which is a little bit to say, that we're not, trying to gerrymander, if you will, the C1 to kind of fit specific requests. And I look at it, the lens I'm looking at this through is ceteris paribus. If we had a clean slate, if I looked at the stock that we had downtown, residences, would I be likely to designate this as part of the C1? And I think, given the nature of the building, given the nature of what its uses will be potentially best utilized for, I'd probably say yes. That's not helpful for for people who've lived here and want to see it developed a certain way. That I understand why you may agree. I would urge you to think maybe your idea of what level of control you have, even as an R4, is going to be probably fairly limited. That's my sense. Two other things. So I want to put my hat on as Economic Development Commissioner Chair, and I can only view the property through that lens. It's a negative economic generator. Period. Zero new residents buying goods and services from our businesses. Zero new businesses providing goods and services to our downtown. So it's a very small way of looking at this policy issue economically. It's a nothing right now. Every month without development is the underutilization of an outstanding and beautiful resource to accommodate customers, businesses, or both. What we have before us is a reasonable zoning change request precipitated by potential developer with a positive history of restoring some of our aging but beautiful buildings to last decades longer. But as I stated earlier, this accommodation of a rezoning change is compelling to me with or without such an attractive prospective developer. Put simply, a zoning redesignation makes this property more likely to contribute to our economy. And that's a very small part of my duty as a chair of economic development to look at it through that lens. And I'm done talking about it through that lens. I'm the chair of the Climate Action Commission. My zoning team, led by Ms. Farrell over here, is actively looking to see how we can reduce minimum parking requirements. A zoning designation change to reduce off-street requirements between R4 and C1 residential properties is much more consistent with the direction we're heading with respect to minimum parking requirements. I'm always open to reasonable ways to reduce the amount of impermeable surface land development. And simply from that perspective, the idea of having the potential of less arduous parking requirements in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is somewhat attractive to me. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hicks. Mayor Scott.
Thank you, Councilor Cramsey. I won't belabor this point too much, but I just want to say for the record, the actions that this council took on May 13th, just almost a month ago, when we were faced with a similar situation, a similar land development process, where the neighbors felt like they were not getting enough information and had no idea what was being proposed, who was doing what. So we changed our SALDO, subdivision and land development ordinance process, to include the following: public outreach meeting. Any applicant that desires to submit a land development or subdivision plan application is required to host a public outreach meeting to include all property owners within a 200-foot radius of the lines of the property. Now, certainly other folks can come too. Additionally, the applicant shall confirm the names and addresses of the property owners with the Cumberland County Assessment Office. This meeting gives property owners the opportunity to review the proposed plan, be informed of, and to discuss with the applicant the design, environmental infrastructure, recreation, parking, traffic impacts, transportation, zoning, and all other issues before the application is submitted to the borough. This is all before. Also, pre-application conference. This is something our staff will be doing. It is strongly encouraged that the applicant schedule a pre-application conference with the borough manager, the borough engineer, the zoning officer, and other staff as applicable. This conference fosters an informal plan review between the applicant and staff, reduces the subdivision processing time and cost for the applicant, and expedites the review and approval process once the plan is formally submitted. And finally, the borough has 7 days after the plan submission to confirm that the submission is administratively complete. This process establishes whether or not the applicant has included key reports and information at the time the plan is submitted. All these items are available to the public for review upon submission. The items required to be provided upon plan submission include a traffic impact study when applicable, documentation that the pre-submission outreach meeting has taken place, environmental impact reports where applicable, providing brownfield assessments, floodplain, sinkhole hazards, wetlands, and finally, storm management information and plan where available. Basically, the SALDO process allows council to put any conditions on that plan from the applicant seeking approval. And this is where you folks come in. You can suggest these things, and we will listen, and we will negotiate with the applicant. So believe me when I tell you, the process is much more improved. Is it perfect? No. Would it be nice if all we had to do was not put up a notice in the newspaper? No offense to my, newspaper reporters, but that's just something like 100 years ago. And we advocate at the legislature to change that, but we get stopped every time by the Newspaper Association because, let's face it, it's revenue. These public notices are revenue. And of course, that can only be changed at the state legislature, so please contact your state representative, either your state rep or your state senator. If you don't know who those are, you can ask any of us and we'll gladly tell you, maybe even take you to the office. So with that being said, we'll turn things back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't belabor the point. My colleagues said a lot of things that I was thinking. I just wanted to thank the public for coming out tonight, for your voices, for your respect in this process. I think I can speak for council that, we always appreciate the input. I, for one, we're all listening. I think these processes work because we hear from folks. To the mayor's point, this process isn't perfect. Even with the transparency that the mayor just outlined, I'm still open to having conversations with council and with our staff to figure out more ways to be over the top transparent, whether that's using our website to post any potential changes. And then it would be kind of on us to make sure that folks are using that mechanism. As I sit up here and think about, this decision, which is a tough decision, right? I don't think anyone in this room is going to be happy, or maybe some will, with how this plays out. But I think, in this room of 30 or 40 people, if we all got to pick what would go on this site, we'd probably have 30 or 40 different answers, right? And that's the struggle of neighborhoods, the struggle of local governments. There is no perfect answer. I wish there was. So we try to do our best. I'm thinking of past decisions that we've made and hearing from neighbors, and it's kind of the reverse, right? There's not enough commercial, or we do other developments and there's not enough residential, and that's the struggle that we have in a landlocked community where there's not open fields where we can build new things and kind of design things how we want. So we have a scenario where we have great neighborhoods across the borough. We have a great downtown, and how do we make it all fit, right? How do we make those Lego pieces fit? So we will, take the vote tonight, and I'm looking, to that vote. I think where I'm at, I came into this meeting with an open mind and definitely hear from all the neighbors and their concerns, and I think it will be a tough vote at this moment. In this minute, I think I'm going to try to put my faith in Mr. Tucky, knowing that that's tough to do, right? And I hope that Mr. Gilroy, Mr. Tucky, really make a commitment to what this project would look like if there is a zoning change, or even if there's not a zoning change. I think one way or another, we do want to see something happen. And just when I got elected to council, I've always been a proponent of mixed use and redevelopment, and I carry that around with any project that we look at, no matter where it is in the borough. So I think this is another scenario where there's no perfect answer, but I hope we try our best to do the right thing. So with that, I'm going to close this public hearing. We'll start the council meeting, potentially the latest we've ever started one. But honestly, again, thank you all for your comments, for your passion, and for your respect. I definitely appreciate it.
Actually, I don't think it's the latest, but given the fact that we've been at this for an hour and a half, I'm going to use mayor's prerogative, 5-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 8:31. Mm-hmm. Call us back to order. Next up is citizens and visitors to be heard. Madam Secretary, I assume there, other than Mr. White, there are no other scheduled folks that want to be heard?
That is correct, Mayor Scott.
All right. Is Mr. White with us?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Please, the floor is yours. And again, name and address for the record, even though we know who you are.
Thank you, Mayor. Glenn White, 53 West South Street. I am your Main Street Director for the Downtown Carlisle Association. I just really quickly would like to say thank you very, very much to Susan Armstrong, to Owen Snyder, to Chief Landis, to Sergeant Miller, to Bob Wirtz, and everyone on those forces for helping us achieve our largest ever Ford parade this past Saturday. I know that Carlisle Events had their largest ever Ford show, and that correlated with our attendance at the Ford parade. So we're on we're hoping to be on the rebound for post COVID prosperity. And we're going to be having a few other things coming up. So we're looking forward to getting out of COVID and getting back to normal. But thank you very, very much for everyone.
Thank you for that update, Glenn. We appreciate it. Are there any unscheduled citizens that would like to be heard in any matter involving borough government? Or are we all talked out? I don't know. All right, going once, going twice. All right, moving on. The consent agenda. The following is a list of routine items which do not appear to be controversial in nature and which probably do not require additional discussion. They can be acted on by one motion in their current form. If discussion is desired on any particular item, any member of council or the public may request the item be removed from the consent agenda, and that item will be considered separately. I'll turn to my council colleagues. Is there any item on the consent agenda, which would be page 2? Any member of the public have issue with anything on page 2 of the agenda? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. And that takes care of everything on page 2. Yeah. Moving on to the regular agenda. Madam Secretary, are there any tabled, continued, or recurring items?
There are not, Mayor Scott.
All right. It says none, but I'd just like to hear you say it. Reports from elected officials. I have no report. We'll go to reports from committee, budget and finance.
Exciting news. Mm-hmm. We had our bid on our bond, and we had a rate of 1.8%. Correct, Susan? Yeah. I got that right. That's almost free money. Mm-hmm. Better than residential mortgage rates. But so I'm going to make very happy motions on that. These will I'll read the motions that I'll explain. I move that council approve a $22,435,000 bond series issue with Robert W. Baird and Company for the purposes of funding projects in the approved 5-year capital improvement plan and refinancing certain outstanding variable rate bank notes.
Deputy Mayor Schultz makes a motion to approve a bond series. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
Next, I move that council adopt an ordinance authorizing and directing the issuance of the 2021 series bonds in the principal amount not to exceed $22,435,000.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Schultz makes a motion to authorize and direct the issuance of this bond series. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. This being an ordinance, it requires a roll call. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Cramsey?
Aye.
Ms. Fulham-Winston?
Aye.
Mr. Hicks?
Aye.
Ms. Landis?
Aye.
Mr. Schultz?
Aye.
Mr. Stubbe?
Aye.
And Mayor Scott?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you.
And that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you very much. Community planning and smart growth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two items on the agenda tonight. The first one is following up on the public hearing that was held a few moments ago. So I'll make a motion that Borough Council may consider a zoning ordinance map amendment that will convert tax parcel ID 042103200066, former Grace United Methodist Church, 45 Southwest Street, from R4 Town Residential to C1 Central Business District.
Mr. Crampsey makes a motion to consider a zoning ordinance map amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll just add, not to belabor the point and not knowing how the vote will go, based on the comments tonight from council and the public, I'm hopeful that Mr. Tuckey and Mr. Gilroy will keep being transparent and keep the neighborhood in the loop as much as possible, because I think there's really a chance for some great things to come out of that property. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This requires a roll call vote. Madam Secretary, if you please.
Mr. Crampsey.
Aye.
Ms. Fulham Winston.
Aye.
Mr. Hicks.
Aye.
Ms. Landis.
Aye.
Mr. Schultz.
Aye.
Mr. Stubbe.
Aye.
And Mayor Scott.
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My second item tonight, I'll make a motion that Borough Council may consider granting a 1-year time extension to satisfy conditions of plan approval and record the plan for the final land development plan for Wolf and Tiger LLC for the property at 1625 Rittner Highway.
Mr. Crampsey proposes a time extension for satisfying conditions of a plan approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion?
I just make a comment. I mean, we have in front of us an example of deliberating on a plan, which can very well be the case for what we previously voted on. So this is an example of how we can intervene things.
Absolutely. Anything further? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries 7-0. All right, moving on to new business. Is there anyone that would like to address council on a matter that we had not previously discussed this evening, either here in Borough Hall or virtually? Going once, going twice? All right. Reports from members of council and staff. We'll start down here with Councilor Landis.
I don't have much else to offer, just reiterating my gratitude for everyone involved in the All-American City Board. So thank you again. It's been exhausting and rewarding.
Absolutely. The best things usually are. Councilor Fulham Winston.
Just very briefly, heartening and disheartening. Heartening, the recent Memorial Day ceremony at Memorial Park was beautiful. It was just very, very moving, and I really appreciate and thank everybody who was involved in that happening, because it was really quite terrific. Disheartening, I was very sad to see that our local representative is once again taking a very strange path and asking teachers to lie about the history of the United States in our schools, rather than telling the truth about how the American experiment has come forward. And I find that incredibly disheartening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crampsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as was stated many times tonight, congrats to everyone who worked on the All-American City Award. It's an amazing honor for an amazing borough. And as we move forward, I guess 14 months now into a global pandemic, hopefully folks are getting vaccinated, and hopefully the numbers continue on a positive trajectory. Just wanted to, again, because I don't think we can do it enough, thank staff, thank Chief and our police department. It could not have been easy to run a borough and serve the residents with everything going on, and then a global pandemic on top of it. And you all are amazing, and a big part of why we win the awards that we win, right? Because we run like a clock. And then lastly, I'll just say, as hopefully that good news continues, we also have amazing businesses. So let's keep frequenting them with the weather turning and getting nice out. I love seeing people downtown walking around, shopping, eating, drinking, and doing all the great stuff that makes us, again, a great city. And I guess I'll just end with a little bit of gloating. Some of us on this panel are Philadelphia 76ers fans. One of us is a Washington Wizards fan. He will remain nameless, but he's the tallest member of council. So I guess I'll leave it at go Sixers. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Well said. As most of you know, I do nothing, so I will turn it over to Deputy Mayor Schultz.
Need a fist bump.
Guys are terrible.
I will note a special day today. So on it was on the eve of this important day that we were award winning, and it was nice to have masks off, be vaccinated, masks off, and be at Molly Pitcher and celebrating an award. But on June 10th, 2019, we voted, or we voted to appoint Susan Armstrong as our borough manager. And 9 short months later, although there were already challenges when she came into that position, 9 short months later, she gets hit with the pandemic, and the difficulties with race relations across the country that affected us here on a smaller scale, but no less impactful. And Susan, you have navigated these past 2 years with an incredible amount of poise, and I can't imagine having had anybody else in that seat over these past 2 years. So I'm grateful that even if you retired tomorrow, which you better not, that you took us through a very difficult time, and thank you very much for doing that.
Councilor Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just reiterate the comments others have said, and congratulations about the All-American City Award, and just my thanks to everybody who was involved in making that happen. I do have 2 updates this evening. First, I did want to share that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had its 2nd meeting over Zoom earlier this week. At that meeting, they scheduled their next 3 meetings. On June 21st at 6 p.m., July 6th at 6 p.m., and July 19th at 6 p.m., all planned to be held over Zoom, with the goal of then, by the end of July, submitting to council their mission statement, action plan, and bylaws for our review. I also wanted to provide an update on the proposed traffic calming measures to Bedford Street and East Street that we've discussed previously. Scheduled for next Thursday at 6 p.m. at Biddle Mission Park is the first in a series of public outreach meetings to share more information about that proposal and to garner additional feedback on it. As I think many of you already know, there's a survey and information available on the borough's website that I'd encourage anyone to go and look at and fill out. And additionally, there'll be surveys that are sent out to properties on Bedford and East Street, providing them opportunity to provide their input. But again, next Thursday at 6 p.m., Biddle Mission is kind of the first in a series of public outreach meetings on that proposal. And that concludes my report this evening.
Thank you very much. Councilor Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to were we able to get Glenn White back? If not, it's okay. All right. Well, he can print me if but I think I can summarize. So, hot off the press. This is so hot off the press. I'm burning. So we have most of the details now in place. We have all the important details in place for a coordinated event that is primarily planned by DCA and Sadler. That's going to run from the 23rd to the 27th of June, Wednesday to a Sunday, daily from noon to 7. We will have tents set outside on Hanover along Sadler, and under those tents will be of most importance someone giving to anyone requesting a free single shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. These folks will be given a $5 love bucks to spend at a downtown business, and we are encouraging other businesses who want to come to give out goodies to those who decide to make the move, which we will also be serenading them as they spend their 15 minutes, making sure they feel okay with various musicians who will be performing. And we may have a radio station that will be helping us. We're getting the final details of that. Do we have Mr. White on? All right. Well, he's going to visually show you maybe what I've tried to do. orally here, but before I turn it over to Glenn, I do want to really thank Sadler and especially Manal, who could not be more supportive of this event. We are both those who in the public safety and economic committees feel this is the way. We actually are merging the two to improve our public health, improve our and I want to make the second really important point, and I want to thank Michelle Crowley for sort of nudging us to really encourage those who are vaccinated to come down. We're going to have a daily prize for people who show their vaccination card, and we want them to enjoy the music, and we want them to come downtown too. So we don't want those who haven't had a chance to get their vaccine to feel, we're having a party just for you, and we can watch you get your vaccine. We want to make it open for everybody. So this is one way we plan on doing it. Glenn, if you're able to come on, if you could just sort of summarize. I think we have a flyer to share. Do we lose him again? I saw his face. Glenn, are you able to share your screen? Okay, well, I won't delay this meeting any longer. Suffice it to say, we will have, you'll start seeing the details of this emerging across social media, across the news networks, and hopefully Sentinel and other papers. And this is our last reason bringing this. This is our last meeting before this is going to happen. So you'll see a lot of chatter going around for businesses and musicians to play their role. So that's the only item I have.
Oh, can I just bring up one more thing? Juneteenth is next Saturday. Yeah. And I forgot. But since you said this awesome. Is our last meeting.
That's ends my report.
Thank you very much. Madam Manager, anything and anything else from staff?
Yes, sir. I just would like to, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the honor 2 years ago to serve this fine community in the capacity of Borough Manager. It was a dream of mine, and I truly, truly feel so blessed. I actually texted Deputy Mayor Schultz this morning when he congratulated me on my anniversary, and I am blessed to work for this community, to work under your leadership and guidance, and I'm surrounded by just wonderful, talented staff. And so it's been an interesting 2 years, and we couldn't have done it alone. It took a community, as we know. So I just thank you again. I would also add that our pool, if you're interested in the pool has opened, please get your passes and come on out. Our staff worked diligently to get the pool up and running, and it's a wonderful community asset that so many individuals get to take advantage of. So we encourage you to come out and take advantage of that during the summer season. And that's all I have for this evening.
Okay. Any other updates from staff that you're aware of, Susan, or no?
No, sir. I think we covered them.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and we are adjourned.